Hey everyone. Oh my gosh, I was so upset on Friday because I totally forgot it was the pep rally schedule. So I thought I would get done with this PowerPoint and the bell rang. I didn't get to say goodbye to you guys properly. So I'll make sure that I come back, before the end of the year to say goodbye because you guys have been an amazing class. I know you'll do incredibly well on the SOL and the AP test. And I know Miss Reichley will really enjoy being with you guys. But I'll make sure to come back to say bye and give you some little gifts. And I want to thank you guys so much for your card. It made me cry when I was reading it, and the gift that you gave me for Dunkin' Donuts for all those munchkins. So thank you so much, and I want to finish going through this PowerPoint just really quickly, and then you guys will work through some readings to get the rest of the content. And I'll upload everything on Edmodo and send you some extra reminds just to get you guys ready for the test. We left off, we were watching a scene from Valkyrie, which was one of the major assassination plots against Hitler. So I want to go to that to finish that, and then I'll finish going through the PowerPoint.
Of course, Colonel. The losses. Unless we can quickly dispatch new blocking divisions at vital points along the German right. Army group is swallowed by the enemies in less than a fortnight, and we run the risk of losing all the ground we have managed to gain in the last 3 years. Our spear.
General Hungis. Ist das solch?
Yes, General. This is Stoltenberg. Russian air activity has proven just as impregnable as their ground force. Führer. In some areas, they outnumber the Italian front. I further. One thing is certain. The Red Army will continue an aggressive push west, even at the expense, in order to rebuild at this already southwest of Lüneburg and closing on Army group. It will be a catastrophe.
So if you want to watch that movie, that's called Valkyrie, you should. It's really, really good. There was a lot of resistance against Hitler starting at this time because they saw him losing and that he was snapping a little bit. And so there's a lot of things you can research for that. But even that assassination attempt didn't work because of that table leg that blocked the bomb. In terms of Hitler's strategy, he was losing on all fronts. So he was struggling to come up with battle plans, but one of his last offensives was heading into France and going towards that territory. And this is going to be a big U.S. loss of lives. It's called the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler was pretty successful in this offensive. He's going to surprise U.S. infantry, and the United States is going to have a hard time defeating him in this battle. So he is fairly successful in the Battle of the Bulge, but that's not going to help him win the war because troops are just going to continue moving into Germany from all sides. At the same time as the Battle of the Bulge, we see what we call the Big Three meeting for a conference to discuss what's going to happen post-war. And the Big Three are Prime Minister Winston Churchill from Great Britain, U.S. President FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. And these three are going to meet at the Yalta Conference to discuss what they plan to do with Germany post World War II. So they make some big decisions here. And, the key player is Stalin because you have two democratic countries working with the Soviet country. So it's interesting to see that dynamic. At this conference, they're going to establish the United Nations, which is supposed to be like the League of Nations that failed. And the United Nations is going to be successful. You'll see that in the Cold War chapter. They start talking about what they can do for relief programs, how they can set up governments in countries that have been destroyed. They already agree that once Germany loses, they plan to divide it into 4 separate zones. The US, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union will all take a zone and they will occupy Germany to help them rebuild. Germany will pay the Soviet Union for the loss of life that they had incurred from the war. And Stalin promises a more democratic Soviet Union, but we know that that's most likely not going to happen. Really, the end of the war in Europe is seen at the Battle of Berlin, when Allied troops coming from the west and Allied troops coming from the east are going to meet in the city of Berlin. They're going to take out all of the German forces that are there. And before the battle was over, Adolf Hitler and a number of his main leaders, some generals, are going to commit suicide rather than be captured and put on trial. The city's defenders finally surrender on May 2nd, and the war in the European theater is going to end on May 8th. So as they are marching through, especially the Soviets, as they're marching through, Poland and Eastern Europe towards Germany, they start finding all of the horrors of the Holocaust exposed. They start finding the concentration camps, survivors of those camps who have been abandoned by the German officials who fled. And even though they had ideas of the Holocaust, they didn't know how bad it was. So they start seeing these different horrors and become incredibly upset by it. Important terms to know from the Holocaust, which I know that you guys are studying in your English class. Genocide, you guys are going to look at more post-SOL. That's my dog. Brody, stop. Shh. The main term you need to know is genocide. Genocide is the systematic killing or destruction of a specific race, political group, ethnic group, religious, or cultural group. The final solution was Hitler or Germany's decision to do a final extermination of all Jewish people. And a lot of this was done in the concentration camps designed specifically for extermination, including the use of the gas chambers. And these are all of the areas where you see the concentration camps. And the ones with the skulls were meant specifically to be death camps. The most famous one is Auschwitz. So here are some of the scenes that the Soviets and US soldiers and everybody were exposed to when they were marching through these areas. And it took a long time for them to comprehend what was really even going on. This image is famous for Elie Wiesel being in it, the author of Night, which I know some of you are reading. So here's Elie Wiesel right there. The result of the Holocaust, and they start to have to comprehend and realize they're going to have to start to go through this as well post-World War II. 11 million people were killed. After the war, they had what are called Nuremberg trials, where Nazi leaders and those who participated in the Holocaust were put on trial for their war crimes. And the trials are going to luckily convict a lot of the Nazis, especially those involved in the Holocaust. They're going to be convicted and they're going to be put in jail or hanged almost immediately. But a lot of them committed suicide before they were able to get charged, and that leads to a feeling of injustice. But really the main feeling that the Jewish community is going to get is, this is when they want to start really pushing to get their homeland back, the state of Israel. The world's going to start trying to become more aware of genocide, especially the United Nations, and ways to deal with it. So again, you guys are going to study this a little bit more after the AP test. And I know you're studying it in English. I encourage you to go to the Holocaust Museum. It'll teach you way more than I ever could. Once Hitler was dead and most of the Nazis were dead and Germany and Berlin were taken, this is what's called VE Day, or Victory Over Europe Day. And Germany is going to completely surrender by May 8th, 1945. Here's Hitler's bunker where he committed suicide. Here is one of his main leaders, Himmler, who committed suicide as well. And by May 1945, you can look at the change in alliances. In the Allied powers, you have Great Britain, the Soviet Union, US, France. And the Axis powers now, you only have Japan. Italy has surrendered and Germany has officially surrendered.
I said to the people of the Philippines whence I came, I shall return.
So the main focus, and really only for the United States, is to continue their war in the Pacific against Japan. And the leader of this island hopping campaign in the Pacific was General MacArthur. And it's his famous quote saying, "I will return." The two main battles that you need to know, and these will be on the SOL, are the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And the main thing that you need to know is that they were really the last part of the island hopping campaign to get closer and closer to Japan. And they were successful in these battles. So here, if you look at this map, this is where it all begins, when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Midway was the turning point in the island hopping campaign because the Japanese were trying to send a fleet here to destroy what was left of Pearl Harbor. Then this was MacArthur's main route in the island hopping campaign, making it all the way to these different territories. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are going to get them close enough to do a full-scale attack on Japan. So this is the famous scene from Iwo Jima with the US flag. And then this is the memorial that you guys should see if you haven't seen it. At the same time as the island hopping campaign, the US was working to develop an atomic weapon. And it's interesting because the person who was developing this atomic weapon was actually a German who had come to the United States, Oppenheimer. FDR, who had been elected for a fourth term as president, died pretty much right after that in 1945. And the new president, Harry Truman, was given this information about an atomic weapon that could potentially be used against Japan to end the war in Japan. And this is, you can't even imagine how tough this decision is for a president, because you have this weapon that could end the war, but you also have this weapon that could start a whole new type of warfare and inflict injury that has never been seen before. So what he had to do with his officials is weigh, what would it take to continue fighting a land invasion, and what would the results be of dropping this atomic weapon? And eventually Truman decided to use it. He thought that a land invasion would kill more people, including American and Japanese. And so he decided that the atomic weapon was the best decision. So here is Oppenheimer, right here in the middle. At around the same time, there's another conference, just like the Yalta Conference, but we have a different type of big three. FDR is dead, so Truman is now the representative. Winston Churchill did not win the election as prime minister, and Stalin is the only original of the big three to meet at this conference. But at this conference, the United States and Truman admit to having an atomic weapon and the fact that they're going to use it. So the weapons are going to leave from Tinian Island, an island in the Pacific. This is actually where one of my grandpas was stationed. He did not fly any bombers, but he was an airplane mechanic, so he worked on the airplanes. And he famously would paint scenes on the airplanes. And he always would talk to me about how he believes he was the last person to wave off the ship that was carrying the atomic weapons, or that had carried the atomic weapons to the island. So he was always so proud of that. But these are the two atomic bombs that are going to be dropped. The first one was dropped on Hiroshima in Japan on August 6, 1945. Killed 70,000 people immediately, destroyed buildings, and 100,000 other people have claimed to die from the radiation poisoning later. I went to Hiroshima. I saw this building. This building was the last building standing. And the Japanese who were there, I was talking to them with an honest discussion about how they feel about the bomb now. And of course, they're still terribly upset about how detrimental it was, but they also were understanding of how fierce the war was and how fierce they were pre-war. And so it was a really interesting conversation, but when you go and you see the damage, you understand the impact it had on them and civilians there, but you also understand the impact that it had on the U.S. almost needing to bring an end to this war. After the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, the U.S. sent a warning saying, hey, we have another bomb. If you don't surrender, we are going to release it. And the emperor, who was pretty young at the time, didn't respond. And so we launched another bomb on August 9th onto the city of Nagasaki 3 days later. And we're going to see the same types of casualties. And after this is when the emperor decided, okay, it's time, and Japan's going to surrender. So here are some memorials in Hiroshima that I got to see. When the emperor surrendered after the second atomic bomb was dropped, this was called in the United States VJ Day, or Victory over Japan. So a lot of people feel as though World War II was over when Germany surrendered, but for the United States it was really over when Victory over Japan Day was announced, September 1945. And General MacArthur, because of his influence in the island hopping campaign, is going to deal with these surrender documents. And this is the famous photo from Victory over Japan Day when the U.S. was celebrating in New York City. You guys will see more in the post-war stuff in the Cold War. Japan became more of a democracy post-World War II because the U.S. is going to push them to go in that direction. So by 1945, your alliances, you can see the Axis powers have been taken out. And in terms of what now, you guys are going to look into that more in your Cold War readings. I will do a lecture on Cold War that I'll post for you on Remind and Edmodo, so you can kind of see what post-World War II was like and what the world was going to do to rebuild from World War II. There's a lot of names you have to know from this PowerPoint for the SOL. Keep that in mind. I would study it in terms of the AP test. The AP test just really wants you to understand why these global conflicts happened, what the results were, and what it did internationally, including stuff like genocide within it and everything like that, and political changes. So if you have any questions, you can let me know and I can continue to walk you through what happened in World War II. If not, you're going to move on to reading about the Cold War, post-Cold War events, and then more modern world history. Good luck.